Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to today. This session is really going to get into the whole concept of pen testing. And I've tried to cover it from the perspective of you guys, like the people commissioning it, not the people delivering it, okay? So what I've tried to do is distill 20 years of scoping calls into slide form, okay? And make them interesting, okay? I'll add that caveat because they're not. They're really not interesting things to do, but they are very necessary. So start off with a little bit about me. My name's Jay Abbott. I work for a company called Nellcote, or Nellcote Cyber. We've been around for probably about 5-6 years now as an organization. Personally, I've been doing this for about 28. I do lose track. I started in the 90s building clone PCs, basically, and it all went downhill from there. So I got involved in security specifically about 21 years ago. For the first sort of 7-8 years of my career, I was a network administrator and a packet pusher by trade. So network engineering at internet scale, which was good fun. Used to work for Electronic Arts, built a lot of gaming rigs back in the early 2000s. So if you had a PlayStation or an Xbox in 2000s and you were playing EA games, you were on my servers. So it's my little claim to fame. I'm also in a couple of manuals, game manuals, which is quite cool. Not always for the right reasons either. So been around a while, kind of know my stuff. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's about 4 slides in this deck, okay? And that's as much as I could get it to. But they're really, really busy slides. So they're heavily animated just to make sure that we can get through the content because it's way too much if you just look at it. So we're going to start nice and small. Vulnerability assessments. Do we all understand what a vulnerability assessment is? Do we understand its defining characteristics? If we don't, let me clarify. A vulnerability assessment is exactly as it sounds. It is a test designed to assess if a system or target is vulnerable to known threats. Key variable, known threats, which means essentially the way it works in a VA is you're going to talk to the service. You're going to say, hey, what version are you? Hey, what kind of things can you do? And based on how it responds, that will generate a fingerprint that we could use to reference a database of services and say, yeah, that's version 6. That's bad. Like 7+ if you don't want to get hacked, right? So that's how a VA works. Heavily automated. It's essentially query the port, get a pattern recognition against a database. You don't need a human for that, which is why vulnerability assessments are tool-based activities, okay? There's a key distinction that I want to bring out first, because often we end up in a debate between these 2 points. Penetration testing and vulnerability assessments. What are the defining differences? Well, if the first is defined by being heavily automated and largely a lookup of known, then a penetration test extends that concept by taking what's found and identifying if something unknown can be done with it, i.e. a human interacting with that service and attempting to put parameters into it that it wasn't expecting. That's the defining difference between a VA and a PT. They work hand in hand. Anyone doing a PT will do a VA as part of the job. It's in the manual. It's part of the steps of doing a pen test is to actually assess, because it's a shortcut. You wouldn't manually intervene with 10,000 services on a network because it'll take forever. So what you want is a tool that'll go, of those 10,000, these 200 look a bit shady, okay? And then the pen tester will focus on those 200 targets, yep. And then they will apply a series of other strategies as well to actually do things outside of the VA scope, depending on the type of test. And that's really the next bit of this session, because VA is largely singular, a thing, it's a definable thing, but pen test isn't. Pen test is many things. Pen test is not a singular item. Pen test contains techniques such as OSINT, or open source information gathering, where we're going to leverage dark web resources and light web resources, essentially any information resource on the planet, to identify information about your organization or the target that's in scope. Now, OSINT isn't typically done in a penetration test you commission where you haven't asked for it, ironically, even though it's part of the testing process. Unless you've explicitly said, hey, can you do some OSINT as part of this test? They're not doing it. And that leads us to the next thing. What happens if you go to a vendor and say, I'd like a pen test, please? You get one of these. You get an infrastructure level assessment, probably of your external perimeter. because that is the minimum viable proposition for what defines a pen test. Okay, that is it, MVP right there. So if you go and commission a pen test from a vendor, you're getting a pen test from a vendor. But you aren't at this point really figuring stuff out or learning anything about your estate. That adds a little bit of value. Okay, but there's more. What about the applications in the estate? Well, there's a whole area of pen testing dedicated specifically to layer 7, right? Specifically to that applications. And that area of pen testing is looking specifically at the logic, the code, and very specifically at the abuses that can happen within that structure, within the original structure of that system. So again, pen test. You specify nothing, you're likely to end up on infrastructure. Unless you're going in specifically for application, you'll end up there or there, right? But we're not done yet, because there's a lot more to pen testing. Because when you're thinking about penetration testing, you distill it down to the actual 2 words. And I can, you know, draw back examples of my career where I've been asked to penetrate clients. And I really don't like those terms, because that's not the best way to ask anyone to do anything. Favorite conversation with a PwC partner once: Jay, please come in. I hear you're the man to penetrate our clients. Okay, let's start again, right? It's got some connotations to it. We have to, you know, break it down. And the reality is, well, who is that client? What do they do? What have they got? What systems do they use? How do they interact with technology? Because unless you know that, can't penetrate anything. I don't know what to look at. So then we might have mobile applications in scope, where we're explicitly targeting the code at the application layer of the mobile app. And the difference between app and mobile app here we're specifically talking about APKs and IPAs, so i.e. the actual files for the applications on the mobile device once it's packaged for that device. So that's essentially reversing that binary and turning it back into the raw code in some way, shape, or form to find problems in it. So very different to that, even though some of the same techniques. Oh, am I out of range? Then we've got cloud and SaaS, because everything's gone SaaS, everything's gone cloud. We've all just stuck everything in the cloud because that solved everyone's problem. Difficult to manage, cloud it. Don't know what it is, cloud it. Just don't know, cloud it. Just move on. Yeah, move it. It's not our problem anymore. It's Microsoft owns it, AWS owns it, Google owns it. We've just got to phone them up when it goes bang, right? Standard cloud model, or the SaaS model, which is the same thing with less access. So again, but depending on the type of system, depending on how you've actually put that together, you know, there's a million levers to pull in AWS. There's a million levers to pull in Azure. You pulled them all. You're sure you've pulled them all in the right sequence to achieve the right blueprint of action that defines the service model in that cloud perimeter that you were expecting? Okay, that's the question. If you can sit here and say, yep, perfect, good for you. If you can't, you might want to get someone to have a look at it, okay? But again, even the actual, from an execution perspective, the strategies here vary massively. The strategy for interfacing with the cloud is largely through the APIs they facilitate. We haven't got special access or special tooling. We're no different to anyone else that isn't for AWS or isn't working at Google or isn't working at Microsoft. So we're going in using the same tech, the same systems, the same service edge that you're using. So we need a high level of administrative access into your platform so we can see all the levers. And then again, we'll use special tooling that's been designed to query the APIs, pull the status of all the security variables, and compare them to maps of good practice based on what type of service it is and how it should be configured. And then that will highlight areas of investigation to then go back and actually look at. So there's a lot of different sort of things here. You take that and then you look at infrastructure. Infrastructure really is hitting everything at an IP level. So you compare that to that. Here we're running tooling against an API. Here we're running hundreds of different tools targeting every possible protocol or service in your environment, whether it's externally or internally based. Because again, context is key. External, OSINT, yep. Infrastructure, external or internal. Application, external or internal. You might have internal apps that you manage, right? Mobile apps, largely external. Cloud SaaS, definitely on the outside. But your Wi-Fi, that's part of your perimeter, okay? If you're not accepting that it is, your Wi-Fi is part of your perimeter. So it should be treated with the same level of respect your internet IPs get from a security perspective, because it's broadcasting your internal networks into the fields around you. And therefore anyone can sit there at their leisure and play with them, depending on how you've got them configured. And wireless at Wi-Fi level breaks down into a couple of basic different attacks these days. Like if you're going after Wi-Fi, just to be really clear, first option, are you going to deauth the clients and then pull the WPA keys so that you can reverse them? That's a 2-second job with any laptop and a copy of Linux running 1 or 2 different tools. Wi-Fi is a good one for an automated approach. Type Wi-Fi, choose the network, hit go. It'll spit out the WPA key about 30 seconds later. Anyone that was on the network just gets booted off. They automatically reconnect, as wireless does. They just think, oh, what's wrong with the network? You've now got that WPA key. So if you're dealing with WPA PSK keys in your environment, that's how easy it is to get a copy of your key. And then it's just down to the GPUs I have access to as to how fast I can turn that back into the original password. Okay, so Wi-Fi. And you go, oh, okay, well, we don't use PSKs. We use WPA Enterprise. Perfect. That does exactly the same thing, but on an individual basis. So all we do is we set up a fake radius access point, deauth everyone, and get them to connect to us. And then they just give us the usernames and passwords in the clear. That one's way easier. So that's, depending on how you've structured it, depends on how the attacks pin together, right? So again, we don't know. Back to that whole scoping calls are boring. Imagine all the information I need to know to test your environment. I need to know everything you know about your environment to be able to actually figure out how to test it. That's why I don't like scoping calls. I have to learn a lot in a very short amount of time. So what about wireless at sub-gigs? Are we even considering the sub-gig spectrum in your environment? I believe the last speaker was talking about sub-gigahertz technology. Door access readers, that sort of stuff. That's all sub-gigahertz technology. And a couple of £100 worth of Amazon purchase will get you through most of it, but we won't tell him that. Yeah, for those who don't know, that's a Flipper Zero running the illegal firmware, not the legal firmware it comes with. And by doing so, that will brute force RFID, Proxmox, all of it, anything sub-gigahertz, basically. It'll do a lot of other cool stuff as well, like brute force your garage door, which has been very useful for me personally in the past, and any garden gates and stuff like that, anything sub-gigahertz. So really useful. Highly recommend getting them. They're totally legal. Who'd have thunk? So wireless at sub-gigahertz. What's your building look like? What's your comms around the building look like? And then, of course, phishing, because, we all know phishing. We've all been phished to death, right? By the bad guys or our companies, depending on, which one had the most budget at the time. But we get phished to death, and it is targeting the users electronically, but we don't stop there because a user is a target. So we vish them as well, which is a stupid term for picking up the phone and calling them and going, can I have your password, please? And they go, yeah, sure. So look, that's pen testing, right? So when you phone up and say, can I have a pen test, please? Yes. What would you like? Right, that's the problem. So we've got this situation, this weird situation in the market where you've got what I consider a highly advanced product to sell. This is a very difficult services product to structure and sell to be useful, to be truly valuable to the person asking. That requires some real thought, as to how you're going to define that program of activities that gives real value to the answer of that question, right? So we've got this situation where the market at the sales side is here, and at the buyer side, it's pretty much here. Like, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could. Do you see what I mean? It's this weird sort of situation. And it does get slightly worse because the industry is full of people like me that like to make stuff up and invent things. So we come up with new terms all the time. Oh, I forgot physical off the bottom. There we go. Good old fashioned just pitching up and walking in. That one gets you in most times, by the way. Seriously, physical access to a building is not difficult. It's the easiest way in. So it always makes me laugh when I see the big breaches and they're targeted, remotely by these super advanced, persistent, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, they didn't. Someone left the back door open or someone forgot to patch the web server, right? Like one of those two variables got them in and now people are trying to protect their jobs and stop getting P45s. That's essentially what happened. And I'm okay with that. We've all been there, but, the press has absolutely no idea. So there's another couple of terms that we need to discuss because we didn't stop with VA and PT. That was probably the first 10 to 15, maybe first 10 years we were there. But then this term started banding around a lot. It was like, oh, you don't want a pen test, you want a red team. Yeah, well, I've had some pen testing. You want to buy one of those red teams or a tiger team? That's why it's a tiger. They're called tiger teams or red teams. Okay, yeah, I want a red team. I don't want a pen test. I want a red team. That sounds epic. Let me get some red teaming going on. Yeah, so when you ask for a red team, all of that is in scope. All of it. Nothing is out of scope. In fact, the defining quality or defining feature of a red team is you don't get to choose. I do. You're the target. I'm the attacker. And I will do absolutely anything I please to get in. That's a red team. So just be careful when you're commissioning red teams. They're very expensive, extremely invasive, and often difficult to manage. I've personally had a team end up in a jail cell. That's happened to me. Had to go and have a conversation I didn't want to have with some people that I didn't want to have. It was in Switzerland and they were armed, which didn't make it any better. You know, that's the reality. Physical access, that comes with some real problems. You know, I once got asked to do a physical penetration test for the UK's Atomic Energy Authority. And in the meeting, I said, who did it last year? And they said, the SAS. I said, I decline. So you've already got the right answer. No one here can help you. But that's the reality of it, right? You know, physical access. You know, this particular site did have a dead man trap and armed. You know, I didn't want anything to do with that at all. So red teaming, all of that, your entire infrastructure, absolutely everything, and we are the bad guys defining quality. So because of that, it doesn't sound that appealing, does it? I don't want a red team. Maybe I get one of those pen tests. I can control one of them. They're a little bit less invasive, but you know. So we decided to rebrand. No one wanted red teaming anymore. It's like, although it's mandatory in finance, for them, they have to do a 3-month exit. If you're a core bank in the UK, you have to do a CBEST test against critical banking infrastructure. That's a 3-month-long red team with a full team. Just to put it in perspective, from those of you in your head thinking, how much might that cost? I don't know, 6 to 10 people for 3 months is going to be a fair old bill. And that's, you know, that's the requirement. That's what a red team should look like. So if you're getting a red team in a week, it's not a red team, it's just a pen test with a few extra bits, right? It's not possible to do a red team in a week. We'd want a month's worth of OSINT, a whole month just to sit there and dig, just to go away and look. Wouldn't even talk to you for a month, but we're going to bill you every day, you know, because it's a red team. So purple teams came along. Now, purple teaming is far, far, far more sensible approach to red teaming. So essentially, you'll notice all hands to the middle there. That's because it is by very definition collaborative. The concept here is you're the blue team. In case anyone was in any doubt, when we talk red teams, blue teams, you're all the blue team. The blue team is the person responsible for the infrastructure that's being attacked, right? So you're the blue team. And the purple team is what happens when you mix red and blue, you get purple, right? And that's just it. So purple team, collaboration. You've got us, our brains going, we found a bunch of dodgy stuff online. We think we can leverage it to fish into a bunch of your estate. So we structure that test. We pick the targets together. You put in the relevant monitoring to assess your own response capability to that. And then we go and run the test. And then we see what the impact was and the output. And then we take that data and we collaborate and we go, okay, well, look, bit of a delta there, and that person needs personal education. But, you know, the reality is that was reasonable, or we need to put some effort in here. But the whole concept is we can identify very specific, unique things in your environment relative to the way things are actually operating, because it's far more collaborative, far more engaged. Also, there's no requirement for it to have all of that in scope. So we can essentially pick and choose a little bit under a purple team. We tend to use purple teaming at the sort of high-end level where a client says, hey, we've got XDR, you know, we've got CrowdStrike in place, we've spent a ton of money on every single acronym you could ever come up with. You know, we've been doing this for a few years, we're golden. No worries, let's test that, shall we? So rather than going in and doing a red team, we'll actually say, okay, so what systems have you got? Let's pick a subset of those systems. Say we want to test the XDR, say we want to put CrowdStrike's money where its mouth is. We'll pick a system and we'll detonate on it a series of known bad, defanged, add that caveat, defanged but known bad malware that XDR should detect and stop, full stop. No arguments, no nothing. Then you sit back and you wait for the email because you just executed it. And that time between that execution And that email is your time to alert. Go look for it in your contracts. It doesn't exist. It's not there because they can't agree it, because they can't measure it, and they can't SLA to it, because it's volume dependent. Think of it this way. You're a CrowdStrike customer. You have a problem. Getting access to CrowdStrike customer support proves difficult when they're busy, doesn't it, as we established recently? So, just throwing it out there. But the same thing happens in the SOC, because all of these vendors ultimately boil down to a series of smart people sat around a data environment, staring at screens, going, that's bad. Put that together, create a new update, create a variable that can detect those 5 things operating together as indicators of compromise and push it out. And then the automated detection can detect it. But someone's got to find it first. Like, there's still humans in the mix. So if it gets really busy and a lot of attacks happen, your time to alert goes up. So how long do the bad guys have in your estate before your super expensive, really awesome tooling actually finds them? Because there is a delta, and sales aren't telling you about it, trust me. So we can test that. We can figure out what the delta is. And then you can go argue with your salesperson and saying, why did it take you 9 hours to detect this? Oh, well, don't know, is the answer you'll get. So if that's like a terms and techniques, that's to get us all on the same page, right? So we understand that this thing is not just a tiny little thing that we book and we buy. It's a collection of activities designed to simulate the exact attack strategies the bad guys would use, okay? That's its purpose, right? That's what testing is. We're testing a theory. We're testing whether or not your security architecture can and will defend itself as you think it will. Yep, in your head, you think, I've put that there, that there, that there, that there. That should detect that type of thing. That should detect that type of thing. That should alert me if anything triggers. I'm good. We just go, let's find out. That's all a pen test is. Let's find out, okay? So what's on you? Well, way more than you think. In fact, the balance of work is very much skewed into the client's requirements. As someone who provides this service, technically, you should phone me up and tell me exactly what you want from me. And I'd be able to tell you there and then, yeah, that's such and such. That'll cost you X. That'll take Y, right? Because you know exactly what you're commissioning. Because it's relevant to your attack surface. Do we all know that term? We're all familiar with what our attack surface is? The attack surface, for those who want clarification, is essentially a term we use to cover everything. Absolutely every way you could interface with your service environment, okay? So your attack surface is your mobiles, all of your end user compute, it's your desktops, it's your laptops, it's the servers, it's the infrastructure, it's your wireless, it's your perimeter, it's the application logic inside the application services you're provisioning. It's the entirety of Azure, AWS, and Google if you happen to have a single node in them, right? That's your attack surface. That is the surface from which I have the opportunity as a bad guy to interface with to find something of yours, okay? That's surface. So first question, what's your attack surface? Because if you don't know that, what the hell are you commissioning at this point? A pen test against what? Okay, you've got to understand what you're looking for. What is it you want to know from this engagement, okay? So how do we define an attack surface? Well, we need to understand how data flows in the environment. We need to understand how it goes into and out of multiple systems. Think about a complex data flow in your environment. Just pick one. Think about how many systems it touches. And then for each system it touches, say it touches an SQL server. Okay, well, that's a server. That's a service, SQL service. On top of a host, that's another bit in scope. The host is in scope. It's in a network. That network's in scope. What else does it touch? How is that network secured? Right? Suddenly the scope gets bigger. So when you start thinking about everything from a data flow perspective, how information flows through the estate, you start to understand how your infrastructure facilitates that data flow, and therefore where the pinch points in it are that are worth looking at. Those areas where, hang on, everything goes through that one node. Architecturally not great, but we should at least make sure it isn't backdoored or there's any problems with it, right? So it starts to help you, once you understand that, understand where to look. User roles and privileges. Again, the users are part of your attack surface because we can attack them. Okay, external and internal facing risks. What type of organization are you? You know, are you the kind that's everyone's coming at? Or is there a specific threat actor targeting your sector? What's going on in the outside world that could be hurting you as an organization you haven't even thought about? And then good old fashioned asset management, because you can't commission testing unless you know what your assets are. Like, what are we looking for? Okay, so basic asset management. So understanding your attack surface. First step that's on you, the very first thing you have to do. Does anyone not want to buy pen testing now? Yeah. Now I've explained what you're supposed to do. The annoying thing from my perspective is for the last 20 years, I have to do this on a conference call. It's not really the best way of doing this, right? Like genuinely, I can get some of the way, but not really. And that's because the next thing that's on you is the most important thing you can do after you've defined what your attack surface is, ultimately what the scope is, yeah? Threat modeling. Anyone done any threat modeling? Oh, I'm not talking about catalog work, like actual threat modeling. Okay, nice and simple. There's lots of different ways of doing that. There are many different frameworks out there you can reference. They're all very well documented, very well explained, and there'll be 1,000 YouTube videos teaching you how to use them, right? So pick one. It doesn't really matter. Stride's good, Past is good. Vast is good, Dread, they're all good. I've used them all over time, but basically pick one of these. Essentially what they are a structured way of trying to understand this piece. So they're really like, okay, so Stride, so it helps you identify threats by categorizing them into 6 types. We're immediately breaking down the amount we have to understand into 6 core types. And they are spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation privilege, okay? And then you start thinking about all the potential threats relevant to those categories. And then once you've done that, you can start structuring the types of attacks that would be relevant to those threats. And you end up with these wonderful models, these really useful models that are brilliant when you're debugging stuff, amazing when stuff's on fire, because you can understand things that, you know, predate you because there's an actual document that explains how it works. Okay, so it's valuable to do, very valuable to do in the estate. Even if not using it for anything, you know, attacky, it's still just really valuable to do. But yeah, that gives you all the information you need to be able to then define those threats, understand what type of attacks. So we can go right back to here and say, okay, well, now we understand what threats there are. So we've gone through our threat modeling and determined that sub-gigahertz wireless isn't relevant. Okay, pull it out, no problem. That's one less area that we've got to think about, you've got to think about, yeah? That simple. And that's what it's about, more than anything. This is about descoping, not broadening the scope, right? But if red teams are big, they take a lot of time. As I've said, 3 months is sort of a typical red team, right? We can do them in a month, but you're not getting much OSINT is the reality. Because if you imagine timescales stripped to a month, you've got kind of a week on OSINT, a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks on sort of doing and reporting. It's not a lot of time to execute all of that work, right? So the whole concept of doing the threat analysis, the whole concept of going through this threat modeling really is about you achieving 2 things. One, certainty on your systems, your risks, and your threats. Okay, and that level of certainty is attainable through no cost. You just got to grab a framework off the internet, read it, and start doing it, and start building that knowledge base. That's all. Completely free of charge. Anyone can do it. And once you've got that information, you can start having proper conversations with security vendors about the types of services you actually need, not the ones they want to sell you, the types of services you actually need, okay? And that's really what we're trying to do here. So yes, this is hard. Yes, this is work. Yes, this is not what you signed up for, which was more work today, okay? But that's the reality of you know, this sort of side of it. There is a lot more on you than you think. And then finally, the reason why you probably decided you needed a pen test is because someone told you to. And that's usually a compliance-led thing. Yep. So in terms of where we are with compliance and the need for pen testing, it's a thing. DFE basically says you have to do a cyber risk assessment. It doesn't actually say pen testing, but in our experience, it has and does include pen testing. What it isn't is entirely pen testing. Okay, you can't just buy a pen test and say we did it. That's not enough. That it wants you to do way more. There's way more in those words than just do a pen test, but it's typically part of it. ISO 27001 explicitly says get rid of your vulnerabilities, i.e. do testing. GDPR, appropriate technical measures, including penetration testing, called out. PCI DSS, I like this one because it's the only standard out there that actually includes a schedule of testing types, times, and activities. So they've actually gone as far as to develop a framework for the testing strategy. So for instance, if you're currently mandated under PCI to do pen testing, it's not just the annual pen test. Technically, the annual pen test requires multiple contexts, including the context of all perimeters, including the internal perimeter to the cardholder data environment. So that's 2 tests. Then you've got, on top of that, your quarterly testing, which is quarterly VA and quarterly wireless. So you've got to do wireless and VA every quarter. And then on top of that, depending on the type of systems you have within that standard, there's further additional testing that gets right down into the application level, depending on if you've built your own auth app or anything. So it can get quite aggressive in terms of the needs. But that's because we're relying on that to stop us all getting defrauded, right? So we kind of want them to put the pressure on people dealing with credit cards. And then SOC 2. SOC 2 requires pen testing. So pretty much you're going to need to do some pen testing at some point, is what I'm trying to say here. At some point, you will be required to do some pen testing. Hands up, who's commissioned pen testing before? Who's had a company come in and do pen testing for their organization? Just this 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so if you're a small few of you then. So the reality is, if you haven't yet, it's coming. At some point, someone on the advisory board, the collective, group of people that decide the direction for your organization, they're going to say, someone's going to mention to them, have you had a pen test? And they're going to ask the question, have we had a pen test? That's usually how we get the initial call. We get the phone call from someone like you going, I need a pen test. What's one of those then? And then we start the education piece. Okay. But the reality is you need to be kind of ahead of it, because that's now and has been for quite a while. So at some point, someone will require you to test your systems and prove that they are secure from attack. And then we go through all this madness. So we have to go back up, we have to figure out the threats, we have to figure out the attack surface, and we have to go back and figure out what we're going to do to actually achieve that. I don't know where we are for time, by the way. We're good. So, any questions on this, on the what's on you stuff? Anyone thinking I didn't sign up for this? Sir, I didn't mean that to you.
Hi there. Just a question about third parties.
Yeah.
And some of them will say that we've done pen testing on our sort of estate already.
Yeah.
Can we trust what they've done?
No.
Fine. They do also say, if you want to do pen testing, just let us know you're doing it.
Yeah, that's a requirement.
Fine.
Right, so the latter bit, yeah, that just let us know is a nice way of saying, if you test us without legal permission, we can send you to prison. So it is a crime. I'll be very clear about that. The difference between hacking and penetration testing is a letter, a written authorization. That is it. That's the only difference. We use the same techniques, we use the same tools, we use the same approaches. The only thing we don't do is try and steal from our clients, because we're just going to send them an invoice instead. But we're all in the same game, right? It's essentially, we're all looking for vulnerabilities, just we cost less than the bad guys. That's the reality of it, because they don't have an upper limit, whereas we have an agreed amount for a certain return of time. But yeah, no, as for the third party notification, yeah. And I'll use this to segue into clouds as well. Testing clouds, yeah. If you read all of them, all of the clouds have an article telling you your requirements in relation to penetration testing them. Most of them require you to submit a support ticket with all of the salient information, including the strategies and approaches. And ultimately will make a call as to whether or not they will allow you. Invariably they do. They don't usually disallow testing. Not the big clouds anyway, because it happens all day, every day, and most people don't tell them, so they kind of just roll with it. But legally, you are required to notify any third party involved in the provision of the system that's in scope. And that could be not just the clouds, right? That could be some third party that looks after the hosting of that particular node in some random data center somewhere. So you've really got to think about, think through your third party negotiations when you're committing, when you're actually commissioning penetration testing. If you don't have those right, people can end up in a lot of trouble very quickly. Not just us guys, because we're the ones that go to prison for hacking into them, but we're just going to say they told us to. Okay, and they're going to go, why are you doing this to us? And without talking to us. So it's just better to speak to those individuals and let them know that it's a requirement, that you're going to do it. But the other aspect of testing the clouds, you really only need to test the big ones. Okay, I'm going to caveat that, saying the very big ones and the very little ones, not the one in between. And it sounds crazy, but if it's a SaaS product, okay, to your point where they say, we've had a pen test, you don't need to do one. Okay, having a pen test just means they've got some results. Doesn't mean they were good results. They've got results though. So they've definitely got some stuff they needed to do. And if it is a good pen test, or my immediate response whenever someone says we have a pen test, I'd like a copy, please. Yeah, they'll soon shut up. No one wants to share their pen test report. It really is warts and all. We don't pull punches in pen test reports. We show you how we broke the thing in bright red. It's the sort of thing, you know, executives dislike seeing. Lots and lots of red, high-level criticals written everywhere, which is what you'll get from a pen test report of a system that wasn't properly built or has issues. So in that case, then, you know, having that permission to be able to test with a third party. And then when you think about the SaaS products, very specifically, if they've got the pen test and they're willing to share it with you, awesome. And it's good, awesome. Like, it comes back lots of greens, lots of ambers. Yeah, we like that. But actually, what you could end up with is a situation where they don't want to share it. And you're thinking, well, I should test it. And the question to you there is, well, are they going to fix it? I mean, they've already got their own test they paid their own money for, and they've probably not fixed that. You testing it is just going to give you something that you can argue about your contract with. But if you need the service because you've just migrated all your data into it, are you really, is there a need to test it? I know that sounds crazy, and you know, I'm sat up here that I should be saying test everything, but when it comes to cloud and you get into the SaaS world, there really is a limit. Now, don't get me wrong, a good example of a SaaS product you should pen test is Salesforce, because it's so complicated and you can build so many sub-functions in it and create these attack surface connections with the outside world. And a lot of that's on you to do. So you definitely want to test that, because I'd argue Salesforce is just cloud development rather than a SaaS product. But if it's just, you know, some product you're using to service a small part of your business, essentially the vendor is where you need to look. You're in third-party risk land. A pen test isn't really helping you. It'll help them, not you. So they need to commission a pen test. You need to apply pressure to them to commission pen testing and share it. And if they won't, then you need to apply pressure to them to sign up to globally accepted and accredited security standards like the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA Star, or something like that. So where there's an independent third party, an individual like myself or another professional who's going to look at their controls and make sure they're built properly, right? And then that's an attestation you can rely on as a client. So when we get into the cloud space, it all gets very difficult because it's not your gear. That's the whole beauty of it, right? It's not your gear. It means you're accountable for it. You're not responsible for it. Two different variables. You're accountable when it goes bang, but your ability to actually make change to stop it going bang tends to be very limited. That's the reality of the cloud. Any other questions? Great. So what's on the vendor? So what's on my job? What's my job? Execution and expertise. You need to make sure you're engaging with a company that knows what they're doing. There's a lot of people out there saying they do pen test and they are not accredited against the Council for Registered Ethical Security Testers, CREST, which is the global standard for all pen testing organizations. So they're not CREST, they're not other ones that exist, Tiger or Tiger Scheme or one of the others. They are well-meaning, might even have all the right skills, but accreditation is really important because you have to place reliance on the output. So you need that accreditation, just means you can guarantee that output is, you know, to a standard. So make sure you've got the execution expertise in place. Safety nets and pulling punches. When I said we operate exactly like the hackers, we operate exactly like the hackers, which means we might accidentally break your stuff. We're sorry. We don't deliberately try and break your stuff, but it happens. It does happen, and it happens in unexpected ways. Had an engagement not just last week. For the first time in probably 10 years, I've seen an infrastructure that scared me. So bad that you run a scan across it and it falls over. Key services falling over left, right, and center. and we're just running ping scans at this point, and we're just sort of arping around and just poking the network stack, and it's like, uh-oh, that's bad, right? We don't mean to do it, but we don't know how delicate your particular devices are. Only you know that. Back to that whole attack surface stuff. If you'd have told us, please don't touch the muxers, we wouldn't have touched the muxers. We'd have left them out of scope. That's the whole point of understanding your attack surface, doing your threat modeling, and then putting it all together and working with a vendor. We can kind of define the areas that we want to look at and we don't want to look at, rather than just going in and kicking everything. Because we will otherwise just go in and kick everything. If it responds to an IP address, it'll take a boot. It is that simple. And if it's delicate, it doesn't stay up. It just disappears. Some gear we found last week, actually you can reconfigure it via its IP stack. Did not know that. So they had to rebuild those. That was a learning curve for everyone involved. We didn't know if you bounced packets off it, that those packets would be interpreted by the system and it would reconfigure itself. I was like, really? Okay. Probably should put that behind a wall somewhere, was my advice. So documentation and evidence. We're going to find stuff that's very, very difficult to understand, right? Like some of the things we're going to find, like the fix or the solution or the demonstration of it, could be right down into the deep applications logic. It could be into a specific sub-protocol's behavior in relation to a certain situation, receiving a certain set of packets. There's a number of things that can be very difficult to explain. So find a provider that's good at documentation and providing you evidence. Most providers now will do videos. So they'll do videos of attacks and screenshots and stuff. So like if we pop your domain and we show you, we'll video it and show you how. And you're like, this is us logging into your VNC servers that you forgot to lock. Then this is us on your domain controller creating a new user with domain admin privileges. It was that simple. And they're like, what? Yeah, someone forgot to disable VNC. Or equally, we're relaying a hash from a SMB1 unprotected node to an SMB1 unprotected with no signing server. And that server happens to have cached local admin creds on it. Perfect. We're in. We're DA. Right? Routes to DA are small, fast, and very effective, right? And DA is the goal. We always see DA. Once we've got DA, we consider the test complete. Because like at an infrastructure level, if we own your domain, there's nothing else in that environment we can't access, right? Because all your authentication is linked to your AD. So pulling punches, back to that original point, most pen tests will pull a punch. They will, by very definition, pull punches because there is a requirement in the Council for Registered Ethical Security Testers standard methodologies that any invasive or dangerous activities that may cause a direct impact to the client should be pre-authorized by the client prior to running. The problem with that is that's VA, not PT. That's VA. Well, it's PT with like, I can VA, but if I'm going to actually run the exploit, I've got to stop and ask permission. Testers don't like that. So pulling punches, like don't hit this system hard, or when we find the exploit that we think might take down your network, we'll pick up the phone and go, you're all right if we do this? How busy are you? Do you feel like a support call? Because that's the reality of it. It can have a negative impact. So reporting output and education, specifically for me, the key that's missing a lot in pen testing is it tends to be fire and forget. You commission a test, you get the output, you're given a report, everyone walks away because those pen testers are busy, right? They've got hundreds and hundreds of clients they're dealing with that they've got to go through. Blah, 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 blah. What we try and do in our organization is try and create a relationship with the people who are doing the fixing. So very much on the end of teams, hey, I've got this really weird thing that I don't understand. You got 5 minutes to explain it to me? Yes. Okay, that's useful from a vendor. So find a vendor that's going to be willing to work with you and continue the conversation beyond commissioning tests and raising invoices. Okay, that would be my advice after doing it for 20 odd years. Planning and support. This is the other useful thing you can offload to a certain extent to a vendor. All that stuff I told you to do on slide 2. Yeah. Well, you could just find a really nice vendor that doesn't mind sitting down with you and helping you figure it out. Yeah, that's you. They exist. They exist, right? There are people out there that are willing to help. The main problem you've got in the pen test industry is because it's largely packaged, it's sold a lot by individuals who don't deliver it. That can create issues with access to the talent you need to do that bit. So again, make sure your organization is willing to put its talent in front of you early on so that you can establish the correct rapport and the correct strategies and correct approaches. So strategies, timings, don't underestimate these two last things from your perspective as well. Multi-year deals are the key to unlocking discounts. That is just the way the market is, right? And the reality of pen testing is it's cyclical. So you're going to be doing it next year anyway. Why not buy two and save some money? Pre-allocation of resources, that helps us, because if you buy next year's as well as this year's and you want it the same time next year, I know I can put someone on the calendar for next year and you've got a tester. Even if we have to move it, you know, closer to the date, doesn't matter. We know we've got resource allocated to the job, so that's useful. And then finally, remediation support. This hands-on tools and advice and targeted intelligence really comes back into that sort of education piece I was trying to say, which is find that vendor that's willing to actually walk you through the attacks, right? That's important. Half of what I found in my own experience is when I'm talking to people post pen test, we're doing a closeout call and we're trying to explain how we got in or what systems reacted well or didn't. Half the problem is trying to explain the concepts. Because if I'm sat here going, yeah, so we just did an NTLM relay and basically an SMB1 hash bounced through our node and we redirected it to a target node over there. And that gave us a session, an authenticated interpreter session. And then from that session, we're able to go in and create a user. And it's like, blah, 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 like, what is he saying? Okay. What you want is someone, as I said, with a video going, look, so I ran this tool. Yeah, it really is 128 characters to hack you. And then you see how what happens and the hash comes through and then you can bring out a diagram and explain it. And the whole point for me is by going through that education piece with you, you as an individual, you're a better person than you were before that call. You know something new that will help you defend the estate you're looking after. So that's my role. My role, and anyone who's in my position's role, should 100% be to improve the people they're working with in the client estate. Okay, that's, in my opinion, something the industry needs to do. That osmosis transfer of knowledge through proximity of the engagement. There's no reason why you can't get skills out of the job as well as output, right? So that's really important from my perspective. Now, I don't know where we are for time or dinner.
Yeah, we need to.
We're done. Yeah. Perfect. So, last slide. TMVM. It's a term you'll hear related to pen test and VA. It's a collective term for everything I've just discussed. Threat and vulnerability management, the management. Two things you need to understand. First of all, it's cyclical, as I mentioned. Second of all, it includes absolutely every technique I've said and every approach I've said. The frequency of when, how often is defined by your threat analysis, your threat landscape, your risks, your business, your, that's what defines what the program is. But a typical testing engagement looks like this: define the attack surface, model the threats, select the scope, agree to test strategy. That's all you. And you haven't even picked up the phone to a vendor yet. Say, choose vendor. Execute the project, remediate the findings, test the fixes, and repeat. It's like painting the Severn Bridge. You'll never stop pen testing. Like, that's the whole point. The whole point is your environment changes every single day. Apply a patch to a system that was pen tested yesterday, it's no longer a valid pen test. You've changed the target environment. That test was relative to the previous target environment, not the new target environment. That's the reality of testing, point in time. It has to be a defined schedule relative to the threats and risks of those systems, targets, applications, whatever, and then run on a regular basis using multiple strategies, regular vulnerability assessments, because they're automated, cheapish, yep, so we can throw lots of them in. And then we'll do targeted pen testing at various points through the year against key systems, or over multiple years against key systems. And you define that over a 5-year plan, and you sit and you put it in a spreadsheet or a timeline or something, and you go, that's our threat and vulnerability management strategy. And that's how you do pen testing, right? That's how you're supposed to be doing it, rather than picking up the phone, commissioning a black box external pen test, which is the cheapest way of achieving your compliance requirements, and is what I'll finish on. There we go. Any further questions? No? Perfect. Wonderful. I think it's lunch.